everyone. Welcome to the second IBBI webinar on reporting on IBBI guidelines, a guided approach. We had the first on 24th of February. This will be our second webinar. During the webinar, we will be looking at the declaration points and related indicators and also talk about few examples to help you understand what needs to be reported. Few indicators are very straightforward and few could be interpreted differently. Hence, we will provide you one point interpretation so that all businesses stand on a common platform. Please ask your doubts in the end to help us reply better and also so that the flow of the webinar is not broken. As you know, IBBI is about to complete its 2-year on 22nd May 2016 and companies who have signed the declaration when IBBI was launched on 22nd May 2014 are required to report on the 10 declaration points. Few companies have signed around 2014 September and hence their report completion will be due around 1st September 2016. All companies who complete their 2 years are required to provide a report on progress made on the 10-point declaration. As this is for the first time IBBI companies would be reporting, hence indicators were developed to ease the reporting. The indicators were developed by the working group consisting of various IBBI members. In total, 18 indicators were developed, out of which 5 indicators were made core level indicators or bare minimum disclosure on action taken on declaration. Sorry. Comprehensive level includes a holistic view with disclosure on all 18 indicators as per IBBI declaration. All companies are expected to report on at least core level. The core level indicators are indicator 1.1, 2.1, 4.1, 6.1 and 9.1. We would be looking at each declaration and linked indicators in details in the coming slides. Companies may choose to report on core level and few other indicators as well. Here we have a brief outline of all the indicators that we have. Many of the declaration points have multiple indicators, many of them only single. It is to ease out the reporting system. Indicator 1.1, which is a core indicator, it comes under the declaration point number 1, which is mapping biodiversity interfaces with business operations. So indicator 1.1 was developed and named as production sites that have been screened with regard to relevance of potential impacts and dependencies on biodiversity and ecosystem services. In this indicator, the company is required to disclose on preliminary screening done on project sites by companies, screening to identify the biodiversity impacts and dependencies that are most important for a project site. The disclosure can be done on number of sites where such screening has been conducted. The particulars should include location of such sites, production capacity, number of employees, approach or tools used to screen the sites for its impact and dependencies on biodiversity. Here we have also presented few of the well-known tools that are available online and easily, such as environmental impact assessment, biodiversity assessment or biodiversity action plan. We have digital observatory for protected areas, integrated biodiversity assessment tool, and as well as the IBBI quick scan and IBBI baseline assessment tool. Many of our pilot companies have undergone the quick scan and the IBBI baseline assessment tool as well. Indicator 1.2 would move from the operation focused screening to the value chain screening. To minimize risk, life cycle analysis of biodiversity impact or dependencies through supply chain is supposed to be screened. Few tools which do the same are listed in the slide, such as the quick scan or the IBBI baseline assessment, corporate biodiversity management handbook, a guide for practical implementation by biodiversity in good company, tabs, toolkit for assessment of biodiversity in supply chain. The next core indicator is 2.1, which says the number of trained employees on biodiversity and ecosystem services. This falls under the declaration point, which is about enhancing awareness on biodiversity within the organization. The company is required to share details of person and also the level of person who have undergone any form of training on biodiversity and ecosystem services management. There are different level of trainings and type of trainings. Some trainings are those which focuses only on conservation, and there are some which focuses on the business's linkages with biodiversity and ecosystems. Companies are required to disclose details of the training as well to make it clear the type of training undergone. Here we have listed out few of the established trainings in the market, such as the Business Ecosystem Training by WBCSD, which is a self-training on capacity building, IBBI trainings on managing natural capital, TEEB, the Economics of Ecosystem and Biodiversity trainings, again a self-assessment. There are some other established training as well on biodiversity, which are done by ATRI's certificate courses and the leadership course in biodiversity conservation by BNHS. Indicator 2.2 is on percentage of employees within the organization who have been sensitized on biodiversity. The sensitization of employees could happen in many ways, such as having events on biodiversity, celebration of important days, or organizing workshops on biodiversity related topics. Number of employees in project unit are to be provided along with number of people sensitized on biodiversity. Company can disclose on number of employees based on their standard system of designating employees, whether they are contract or part-time, are to be included, and it needs to be made clear while reporting. Indicator 2.3 sorry, which is on activities undertaken to create greater awareness on biodiversity among employees, is where the company is supposed to provide the type and scope of programs implemented and assistance provided to create greater awareness on biodiversity among employees. The biodiversity awareness and sensitization program, which has been undergone by the employees, has to be listed in 2.3 under the scope of the program, how the programs, what kind of programs were conducted and what were the scope and type of programs that were conducted. Indicator 3.1, which falls under the declaration point number 3, which is about assessing biodiversity risk and opportunities. The indicator 3.1, which is assessment of impacts and dependencies with regard to biodiversity and ecosystem services. The company needs to describe the impacts and dependencies on biodiversity and ecosystem services for sites that have undertaken an assessment. Impacts could be direct due to operation or indirect through its supply chain. Dependencies referred to ecosystem services companies are dependent on directly or indirectly. Many companies directly interact with ecosystems such as agricultural industry, beverage industry, water services, forestry, electricity, oil, gas, mining, and tourism. It is also relevant to sectors such as the general retail, healthcare, consulting, financial services, and others to the degree that their suppliers or customers interact directly with ecosystems. General retailers, for example, may face reputational or market risk if some of the suppliers are responsible for degrading ecosystems and the services they provide. One example of impact and dependency assessment is for a company called Mondi. In 2008, the International Paper and Packaging Company wanted to address the impacts that its plantation had on freshwater and biodiversity in a water-scarce South Africa. And biodiversity and ecosystem services assessment helped Mondi contextualize many of the known drivers of water scarcity in the region, such as the spread of invasive species, inefficient irrigation practices, climate change, and their increasing water demands of a developing nation. The assessment also expanded the water scarcity analysis beyond the scope of Mondi's existing environmental management system, prompting new solutions and the establishment of a comprehensive freshwater strategy, stretching from the plantations management to the community engagement through to Mondi's government relations. Indicator 3.2, which is about assessment of risk and opportunities with regard to biodiversity and ecoservice, is a step that comes after a company has conducted an assessment of impact and dependency on ecosystem services. Here we have listed out few of the examples for various kind of risks and the opportunities that lies along with it. For example, the physical risk, which is like increasing natural hazard cost, more frequent or severe storm damage due to degradation of coastal ecosystem and loss of their natural protection role. Opportunity is such as reducing costs from investing in green infrastructure, which protects again the natural hazard as well as it is cost effective. Legal and regulatory risk include the cost of maintaining the compliance, such as emission reduction. Opportunity by reducing compliance cost by using resources more efficiently and reducing waste. Market or product based risk, such as changing consumer values or preferences, lead to reduced market share, whereas the opportunity could be emerging environmental markets and products may offer new revenue stream from company owned or managed land. Example, carbon, water or habitat credits. Reputational risk could be like increasing staff recruitment and retention cost, declining interest in shareholder investment, opportunities such as increasing access to resources as a partner of choice for governments and stakeholders, increasing market share of their products. Financial risk, increasing financing cost, higher interest rate and harsher condition, opportunity, new or maintained investor interest and confidence, improving access to finance from various lending organizations. The next core indicator, 4.1, which says about the organization-wide policy that address biodiversity and ecosystem services, requires the company to indicate whether organization has specific biodiversity policy or policy is embedded in environment, HSE, or sustainability policy. The company also needs to disclose whether the report or policy will be publicly available. Point number or declaration number 5, which is setting objectives and targets for biodiversity management, contains two indicators. Indicator 5.1, which is on strategy for biodiversity and ecosystem management, requires the company to report on any goals and targets that are established for biodiversity and ecosystem services management, such as Lafarge Group has a requirement of getting all sites near protected area a biodiversity management plan is a target to be achieved. Indicator 5.2, which is the action plan to avoid, minimize, rehabilitate, and offset biodiversity impacts, requires the company to indicate whether the company has any action plan to avoid, minimize, rehabilitate, or offset biodiversity impacts due to the project. For example, in this case, we have quoted Rio Tinto's QIT Madagascar mineral project shows how to have such an action plan. Companies can write about such projects or action plan in this section while reporting. Here we look at where the company has listed out the mine impacts due to the mining activity, and they've also listed out what are the various ways, such as how did they avoid, first of all, the impact, how did they minimize, how did they rehabilitate the rest of the forest, and how did they offset the remaining impacts from the mining activity. I now pass the discussion on other indicators to my colleague Praveer Deshmukh.
Hello, good afternoon to all. Thanks, Arnav, for explaining our first five indicators and declaration points and their indicators. So now we look after the remaining five declaration points, and the first is declaration point number 6, which is designating an individual within the organization as a biodiversity champion. And we further divided our members divided this section into single point section 6.1, which is also a core indicator. So company needs to provide a person name who is the so provide details of a person designated as a biodiversity champion within your organizations. Maybe company can go for a single person for an organization, or they can also nominate more persons based on the various various small projects or site locations also. So what is the importance of this person? The person will be a single point contact person for all biodiversity related issues, that person should have the knowledge of understanding knowledge of your business and also the biodiversity, and he also related to the various impacts of projects, maybe new project development or expansion of projects, impacts of projects on the biodiversity, and also which are the dependencies on the biodiversity. And the responsibility of these persons will be the he will support some decision making within your organizations, that if the company is going for expansion of new project, and if it is located near any wildlife sanctuary or any specific river or some high conservation value areas, so he will provide some of the suggestions to management, that how we can plan this project, and then minimize the impacts, negative impacts on the biodiversity, and also provide some of the suggestions for the positive impacts. Then we move to the declaration number point 7, which is including the applicable biodiversity aspects in your environment management systems. So this point is further divided into a single indicator, which is inclusive of biodiversity aspects in environment management systems. So, so these are some of the examples for include this. Most of the companies having using ISO as a standard for all environment management systems. So, including biodiversity aspect will be a first priority, uh, and the members needs to disclose how the biodiversity is integrated in this environment management system of the company at various levels. Most of the businesses, we already discussed that most of the businesses are following the ISO 14001 standard for all their EMS. So the second level is integrating biodiversity issues in your EMS is to incorporate at the policy level. So that's why the second example of integration at policy level. So the company can go for a specific dedicated policy for the biodiversity, or they can include biodiversity as a specific part in their environmental policy. Then third aspect is integrating biodiversity related aspect in the procurement policy. So most of the companies, they are sourcing some raw materials from the some of the vendors and in a value chain. So if they develop a biodiversity policy in the procurement, then they can also check out which are the negative impacts and dependencies of their suppliers on the biodiversity, and they can provide them a capacity building, and also implement some of the management plans in a value chain to minimize their impacts and dependency. So so this is the one of the way. And then another example is also integration it as a aspect impact level analysis. So for example, if we take an example of land use change, most of the companies required a huge land for establishment of our workstations and all these things, roads and all these things. So land use change is a primary impact, but because of land use change, there might be this might be leads to a fragmentation of habitat, maybe loss of soil and fertility of that area, maybe because of cutting of trees, or maybe diversion of forests may leads to the flooding. So these are the secondary impacts, and understanding the aspect impact analysis, they can easily analyze which are the primary impacts and which are the secondary impact, and they can plan some management plan based on the secondary impacts also. And as per our EI requirement and all this thing, we are only focusing on the primary impacts and not going on the secondary impacts. So these are the examples that company can present under this indicator. So now we move to the point number 8 of our declaration, which is encouraging relevant stakeholders to support better biodiversity management. So this point we further divided into 3 different sections. So first is 8.1, activity undertaken for or with suppliers. So this is specifically focusing on the activities you are undertaking for your own suppliers. Uh, so for example, appraisal industry check on their suppliers, or on how the raw material, which is cotton or some of the colors, they are sourced. And there are so many certifications are available for some of the raw material sourcing, and they are giving a sustainability certificate for that. So company can take that certification from your suppliers, and they can report it here that our supplier is certified, and they are having a less dependency, or they are sourcing raw material sustainably. Then second indicator is activities undertaken for or with customers or consumers. So the company can address this indicator by understanding the supplier's requirement and their impacts and dependencies on the biodiversity ecosystem services, and then implement an action plan for minimizing their impacts and dependency on the biodiversity, and also provide the capacity building. So here I want to explain one more examples of a cloth washing powder. So previously they studied that for first their powder required a bucket of water to clean 5 cloths. So now they modify the updated their powder with now the same 5 cloths they requires only half bucket of water. So that's how they minimize the impacts of their product on the water. So this is also a benefiting to the biodiversity and ecosystem services, because the pollutant is not getting entered into the natural ecosystem. So this is one of the objective. uh, then point number 8.3 is the activities for with or other internal and external stakeholders. So this is a additional point which is also beyond our IBBI declaration, and companies are encouraged to provide the information or any support they provided for the conservation of any biodiversity park or any national parks, or maybe going for the conservation of any specific animals or any plant species. For example, there is a tiger, dolphins, or they are undertaking any studies for some sharks and vultures and all these things. So company can present this additional work they have done for the conservation of biodiversity under this section. So then we go for the point number 9, which is encouraging the policy advocacy and dialogues with government, NGOs, and academia on biodiversity concerns. So this point is further divided into two main indicators. The first 9.1 indicator is engagement through various platforms, example sharing of best practices, research partners, and sponsors. The, the company can provide some information on the various how they are engaged with the even for the IBBI and also for the various platforms for sharing their views on the various policies. Also partnering with some of the government organizations that how the policy should go forward, and which are the bottlenecks for the industries. These types of presentation they can work provide some details on under this category. Next is participation in policy advocacy as international, national level, and local level. The member can provide information of any engagement activities with the policymakers, any government department or regulatory bodies on a local, regional, and national level, and also on the international level that could either directly or indirectly influencing for the biodiversity related policies within state, country, or where the company operates. The members can describe any significant issues that are the focus on your organization participation in policy advocacy. So these are the policy advocacy examples. Then this is our last point of declaration, which is initiating the value of relevant biodiversity and ecosystem services. So this is not a 10.1 is not our core indicator, which is valuation of impacts, which is positive, negative, and dependency, which is also a direct and indirect dependencies. So members can report on any valuation studies undertaken by them to evaluate the value of biodiversity they have created or they are supporting within their premises, which is also in the terms of monetary terms or maybe on the non-monetary terms. In monetary terms, it's totally a financial terms, but in biodiversity can easily monitored in a non-monetary term. So company can provide informations on the how much green belt they are developing and what are the species they are now, which are the migratory species or any local bird species are residing in their areas. What are the monitoring they are undertaken for assessment of biodiversity? They can present some of the specific indicators that the biodiversity is performing in their project area. So they can present here. So actually the valuation will help companies in understanding the how the biodiversity is performing in your area, and you also understand if it is not performing well, then definitely there might be some upgradation is required in your management plan. So these types of information the monitoring will provide to the industries and also the businesses. Here we have come to the end of today's webinar, and now we can go for a question session.